Hello, welcome to MJRRPG, a podcast for tabletop role-playing game reviews, replays, and whatnot. The following narrative replay is for the Japanese Call of Cthulhu scenario, Kamigami wa Denshi Doragu no Yume o Miruka, or Do God's Dream of Digital Drugs, written by Byoushin of the INT no Gisei Shataku, or Victims of INT group. I ran it a few months ago with some folk on the Good Friends of Jackson Elias Discord server, and still think about it from time to time. It was a fun one. This was a comparatively long scenario compared to the others I've covered in these replays, and so will be broken up into 3 parts, or days. This will just cover the first day. If you're a keeper, by all means give this replay a listen, or read it on mjrrpg.com. If you're a player, or just don't want to know everything about the scenario ahead of time, you can read or listen to the first spoiler-light section of my review of it, also on mjrrpg.com. And now, on to day 1 of Do God's Dream of Digital Drugs. They had all received calls from their mutual friend, Masahi Hamamatsu, urging more so, them to take a few days off for an important get-together. He had something to show them, something that would change their lives. Though knowing Hamamatsu as prone to exaggeration, they did as he said, more looking forward to meeting him and each other and getting a few days away from the everyday grind. Masahi could be eccentric, but he had always been there for them whenever things got hard, and without him the 4 of them likely wouldn't have stayed friends after high school. Coming off of work, the programmer, Akira Kubo, was the first to arrive at the venue Hamamatsu indicated for their meetup, a little underground live bar, headlining an electro-punk jazz band he'd never heard of. Definitely something Masahi would have chosen though, as an EDM producer he had an eclectic taste in music. Akira sidled up to the bar, people watching to pass time while waiting for the others. He could have come earlier, his schedule certainly allowed it, but the pianist, Majima Yuto, preferred to take his time. 9 to 6 jobs are for other people, normal people. Artists, like Majima and Masahi, worked in schedule with their muse. Of course, Majima happily accepted an excuse to shelve that muse for a few days. Spotting Akira at the bar, Majima slipped through the crowd to greet his friend. Itsumi Makino, always worried about taking days off. You could never be sure their quest would go through, and even if it did, you could always be called in. Nevertheless, Itsumi gladly stowed his uniform, locked up his revolver, and left the police station excited for a few days with the boys, ideally not having to worry about wrestling any drunks or filing missing item reports. Finding Majima and Akira at the bar brought a smile to his face, even if the noise grated a tad. Bleary-eyed Daiki Sato stumbled into the venue last, still in his suit, smelling of sweat and cigarettes. At least he'd loosened his tie, letting his brain know that, finally, the workday was over. And unlike most days, he could finally relax for more than a few hours. A part of him felt a perverse sense of guilt about not catching the train back home, preparing tomorrow's lunch, and passing out to catch just enough sleep to wake up in time to catch the train back into the city. No, tonight heralded 2 days of absolute freedom. Daiki stumbled past his friends, ignoring their salutations until he'd ordered, downed, and reordered a whiskey. Then, Masahi Hamamatsu sauntered up to them, clapping shoulders. He told them how happy he was to see them, and how excited he was to spend time with them. They found tickets pressed into their hands. The Roppongi Hills Music Festa, it read, dated the day after tomorrow. Masahi said he was involved in the event's planning, and knew there would be a performance he needed them to see. A performance that would change their lives. He didn't answer any of the questions they bombarded him with. Laughing, he simply said they had to see it to believe. The Hills Music Festa, HMF, rang some bells. It had been on the news, not just because it was the biggest tech-focused music concert in Japan, but because it had been on the receiving ends of protests and threatening demands for it to be cancelled. Tokyo politicians and police denounced the threats, vowing the event would go ahead with tightened security. When asked about the protests, Masahi half laughed, half scoffed. Cowards, he simply said. At the best of times, Masahi tended towards distraction, and so none of them questioned the earbud trailing into his sweater. Odd, certainly, to listen to music while at a live show, but Masahi was Masahi. They did note that even more than usual his eyes wandered, his sentences trailed off, he missed conversation cues. When pressed if he felt alright, he replied he was doing just great, and just so glad that they were with him. Then he stabbed a pen into his neck. Itsumi rushed forward to catch Masahi as he fell, wrestling with him to pull the pen out as Masahi seemed to be trying to jam it further in. As Masahi's strength waned, Itsumi removed the pen from the ragged wound, blood spilling out between his fingers. The others, getting over their shock, called an ambulance. Akira spotted Masahi's phone having tumbled from his pocket, lying in a growing pool of blood. Earbuds still jacked in. No sound, though. The phone glitched out when he tried to open it, but with a bit of finesse, he managed to at least power on the screen, and saw that Masahi had been listening to a song titled Tristan. The phone was rapidly dying. Afraid the blood had corrupted data storage, Akira quickly dismantled the phone. It did indeed appear damaged, but with a bit of work he thought he might be able to recover some of the hard drive. Despite Itsumi's best efforts, by the time the ambulance arrived, Masahi was dead. Seeing people die no longer shocked Itsumi, but a friend going cold under his hands still did. Police questioned the group for a time, but besides having Itsumi fill out some extra paperwork, with the promise of much more come his next workday, they released the group from the station. A colleague of Itsumi, Detective Gakuto, followed them out though, and between puffs of his cigarette, told them that Hamamatsu's death seemed familiar. 4 other individuals directly related to the HMF had died recently. The police conducted an investigation, indeed technically were still investigating, but all the deaths were clearly suicide. Busy with other matters, least of which preparing security for the HMF itself, the police chalked up the suicides to work pressure. The case essentially shelved. Detective Gakuto had been moved on to other matters, but something still rubbed him the wrong way. If Itsumi and the others felt the same way, maybe they could poke around on their own time. He handed over a note with the names of the 4 deceased: Kanakura Saya of Chala Inc., Baden Thalman of Pencher Co. Limited, Professor Akasawa Sakurako of Yugoshi University, and Chikura Takumi of Masayan Record Co. Limited. Itsumi pressed about the threats against HMF, and Gakuto seemed a bit cagey, mumbling about confidentiality, but led on that there was an ongoing investigation into a group called the Church of Serialism, thought to be responsible. He warned the group off for now, and even though the serialists seemed like peaceful enough new religion loonies, they should leave the church to the police, just in case they did turn out to be dangerous. Left to their own devices, the group quickly decided that they would find out why their friend had killed himself. The companies on the detectives' list would all be shut at this time of night, but they thought of a possible lead before waiting for tomorrow. They went to Masahi's condo. A trusting friend, he told his friends the key code to his door. Sparsely furnished and relatively neat, with the exception of Masahi's work area. Akira quickly spied Masahi's laptop. Password locked, but Akira knew he could fix that. As he worked, the others rifled through Masahi's mess. Mostly work-related, compositions and abstract notes. Amongst the chaff, they found a calendar marking a date a month past, a meeting, with all the suicide victims. They also found a black business card, marked with the name Church of Serialism, and a USB with the tag Tristan taped to it. Akira cracked the password. A cursory check found Masahi's email history unexpectedly sparse, as if he had deleted swaths of emails. One remaining stood out. Addressed from Akasawa Sakurako, the dead professor from Yukoshi University, and addressed to Masahi and the other victims. It contained a password for a USB drive, and a reminder that Tristan was confidential up until its debut at HMF. Remembering that the last played track on Masahi's phone had been called Tristan, Akira plugged in and unlocked the USB drive. As expected, it contained a single file. One very large audio file, titled Tristan. The speakers on Masahi's laptop didn't work. Akira suspected they'd been intentionally disabled. An audio engineer's headphones lay snarled on the desk, though, and after a second of everyone looking at each other, Majima slipped them on and nodded to Akira. He pressed play. Chaos, beauty, madness and absolute clarity, swirling rhythms cascading into infinite patterns. Grief, joy, curiosity, panic, calm. So calm. They watched Majima. He stood, hunched over the desk, eyes looking ahead, one hand on the headphones. All normal. His other hand stabbed a pen through his eye. Itsumi jerked forward, grabbing Majima's arm as he tried to dig the pen further into his eye socket. Akira tumbled back over his chair, but Daiki had the presence of mind to help Itsumi, and together they managed to wrestle away the gore-streaked pen. They held down Majima, arms still jerking as if trying to get at its own flesh, and yelled for Akira to get a towel to staunch the bleeding. Within seconds, though, Majima calmed, looking around for a brief moment with cleared eyes. He reached up to touch blood pouring down his cheek. Then the screaming began. 2 hours later, Akira, Itsumi, and Daiki smoked outside a hospital. Majima was stable, and he would be held at least overnight. The doctors, of course, wanted him under observation for weeks, but in his few moments of consciousness and clarity, Majima demanded he be released as early as possible. They'd meet him in the morning outside the hospital and decide where to go. And so they returned to their homes. Akira spent the night fretting over Masai's phone, trying to salvage anything from the storage unit. Itsumi went over the names of the victims before turning in for the night, doing some brief searches of the companies to get a head start tomorrow. Daiki kicked off his shoes, marched through his one-room apartment, and without changing or bathing, collapsed on his futon and promptly passed out. And Majima dreamed through drug-induced sleep of a song he could barely perceive, but knew he'd never be rid of. Thank you for listening to Day 1 of Do Gods Dream of Digital Drugs. If you enjoyed this replay, do consider purchasing the Japonism scenario pack on Booth.pm, though please know that it is currently only available in Japanese. Also, thank you as always to CryoChamber for the use of their albums Cthulhu and Yog-Sothoth. See the show notes for links to their YouTube and bandcamp. Until next time, have a good one.